my research looks at the content of first-year composition primarily, and what transfers from first-year comp to gen ed writing, or even into the majors. But within transfer, what's the content of first-year comp that's going to make that transfer happen best? So that's it in a nutshell. So within the area of content and first-year comp, I've also become interested in the content of other things. I'm teaching technical writing, for example. I'm teaching business writing. I'm teaching a course in book and magazine editing and lots of other things. So I'm seeing all these connections, and I'm starting to think about the greater content. So not just content in first year comp, that of course is an area that we all don't agree on in the field, right? What that content should be. So that's why I was interested in looking at that. But now I'm thinking there's so much more about content alone that I could look at, let alone all the other connections. I mean, transfer is huge, but generally, the interest area that I have is around content. And right now it's the first year comp, how we can best prepare students to do what we say we're there to help them do, which is to understand, how to make the writing that they learn in first year composition work for them in other contexts. And I'm pretty convinced that there's some sort of content, even if we don't nail it down completely or 100%, that we're going to find that there's some content that works. We have already found, many of us have, that there's some content that works better than others. And so as much as I can narrow that down, the better I feel about it.
I think that what I would say is two things. One, I think what Leanna and I have found in our research is that you can, in fact, teach for transfer if you deliberately and intentionally do so. And I think the other thing that we found, the second thing, is that you have to have a very specific type of curriculum that is centered on key terms and framework of reflection and the students creating a theory of writing. And I think together what that shows us is that students can take what they learn in our course and apply it to other writing situations in very interesting and meaningful ways. So success is not defined in a neat, tight little box. It's more, they take it, and that what they're able to do is reframe the new writing situations in ways that allow them to understand it and further their writing abilities and writing processes.
What's not working so well is content that confuses students, and that turns out to be within a couple of sort of buckets. So one is things that look familiar to what they've learned in high school, so like a literature-based curriculum that they've learned in high school. What that does is tell them that this college writing is going to be the same as high school writing, and it's not. And so that can be confusing for them. They sort of go back to their old ways and aren't as open to learning in new ways if it doesn't look different. And that can, even if they start to learn that it's different a little bit later in the semester, it doesn't start them out well. The second type of content that doesn't work very well is some of the themed courses that we see, and there's so many of them out there, right? It could be a theme about, I've seen themes about vampires, or even themes, about cultural studies. I'm not sure how well that's working, because what happens is, with the themed approach, is students latch onto the theme. They focus on the theme rather than the stuff about writing that you want them to learn. They like the theme. That's why they sign up for a themed course, right? They go for something that's exciting to them. Maybe they want to be foodies, and they sign up for a course on, sustainability, organic food, or whatever. And then they get really into that, and they research that, and they talk about that instead of learning about the writing. So what does work then is, what we found is concepts of writing. So a theoretical approach that will help students create a framework of knowledge that they can apply to new contexts. And that requires theory about writing, writing concepts like rhetorical situation, for example, discussion of audience and purpose, and so that kind of theory. And then a reflective component that's pretty sophisticated. So reflective practice constructed at various levels. It's reiterative. It goes on throughout the whole semester so that they can continue to take what they've learned theoretically, apply it in a situation, then another writing situation, then another, and start to see the connections that they can then take with them out to another course.
The one that comes to mind, obviously, is Anne Beaufort's conceptual frameworks, because her frameworks impacted how we design the syllabus. We didn't necessarily do exactly what she did, but after reading her book and looking at what her conceptual framework suggested, we knew that there were some components of it that had to be inside our curriculum. So the idea of content knowledge, which Leanne will talk about in a second, is really important. So we knew we had to have a very specific content knowledge. So Beaufort's work is obviously important. And then she mentions it or hints at it at the end of her book about the idea of thinking about thinking or reflection. And so that is the second thing, is probably the idea of reflection, but how I define it and how we define it for the course stems from Yancey's book Reflection in the Writing Classroom, which hers was influenced by Donald Schoen, and someone out of education. So between Schoen, Yancey, and Beaufort, we've been able to develop and kind of work through some of the curriculum, transfer curriculum.
If you talk to students intentionally and deliberately about the goal of transfer and how each of the assignments, particularly the larger assignments, how they're designed to transfer, I find that they will take that to heart and apply themselves a lot better in terms of taking the information and making it work in a new context, because they understand what you're trying to teach them and they go with the flow instead of sort of swimming upstream.